Welcome back, Corey Hughes Bloody History. All right, we're going to continue on with these ZRRIFLE files. Going to pick up right from where we left off. Track 2 activities in Chile were undertaken in response to President Nixon's September 15th order and were directed towards actively promoting and encouraging the Chilean military to move against Allende. In his testimony before the committee, Kissinger stressed the links between Tracks 1 and 2. Quote, "There was work by all of the agencies to try to prevent Allende from being seated, and there was work by all of the agencies on the so-called Track 1 to encourage the military to move against Allende. The difference between the September 15th meeting and what was being done in general within the government was that President Nixon was encouraging and a more direct role for the CIA in actually organizing such a coup." Kissinger testimony, page 13. Tracks 1 and 2 did in fact move together in the month after September 15th. The authorization to Ambassador Corey, who was formally excluded from Track 2, to encourage military coup became broader and broader. In the 40 committee meeting on September 14th, he and other appropriate members of the embassy mission were authorized to intensify their contacts with Chilean military officers to assess their willingness to support the Frey Gambit, a voluntary turnover of power to the military by Frey, who would then have been eligible to run for president in new elections. In a situation report to Dr. Kissinger and Assistant Secretary Charles Mayer on September 21st, Ambassador Corey indicated that in order to make Frey Gambit work, if necessary, General Schneider would have to be neutralized by displacement if necessary. Corey to Mayer and Kissinger Situation Report, 21st of September 1970. In testifying, Kissinger felt that Corey report indicated, quote, "the degree to which Track 1 and Track 2 were merging, that is to say that individuals on Track 1 and 2 were working exactly on the same problem as the CIA was working on." Ambassador Corey's activities in Chile between September 4th and October 24th support Kissinger's view that the line separating Track 1 and Track 2 often became blurred. For example, the ambassador was authorized to make his contacts in the Chilean military aware that if Allende were seated, the military could expect no further military assistance from the U.S. Later, in response to his own recommendation, Corey was authorized to inform the Chilean military that all map and military sales were being held in abeyance, pending the outcome of the congressional election on October 24th. On October 7th, Ambassador Corey received the following cable from Kissinger and Undersecretary of State U. Alexis Johnson. Quote, "You are now authorized to inform discreetly the Chilean military through the channels available to you that if successful effort is made to block Allende from taking office, we would consider the cuts we have made thus far been forced to make in Chilean MAP and otherwise increase our presently programmed MAP for Chilean armed forces. If any steps their military should take should result in civil disorder, we would also be prepared promptly to deliver support and material that might be immediately required." The essential difference between Tracks 1 and 2, as evidenced by instructions to Ambassador Corey during this period, was not that Track 2 was coup-oriented and Track 1 was not. Both had this objective in mind. The difference between the two tracks was simply that the CIA's direct contacts with the Chilean military and its active promotion and support for a coup were to be known only to a small group of individuals in the White House and CIA. Kissinger testified that Track 2 matters were to be reported directly to the White House for reasons of security. Thomas Karamessinis, the CIA's deputy director of plans at the time, and the principal CIA contact with the White House on Track 2 matters, testified on his understanding of why State Defense and the 40 Committee and Ambassador Corey were excluded from Track 2. Quote, "That was not a decision that we made, but the best that I can do is suggest that there was concern about two things. Number one, that there might be serious objections logged. For example, by the State Department, particularly if Track 2 were to be laid out at a 40 committee meeting. And the only other thing I can contribute to that is that it was felt that the security of the activity would better be protected if knowledge of it were limited." Karamessinis' testimony, page 122. C. CIA views of difficulty of project. On one point of the testimony of CIA officials who were involved in Track 2 is unanimous. They all said that they thought Track 2 was unlikely to succeed. That view ran from the working levels of the agency to the top. They all said they felt they were being asked to do the impossible, that the risks and potential costs of the project were too great. At the same time, they felt they had been given an explicit presidential order, and they tried to execute that order. A few excerpts from the testimony follow. Richard Helms, CIA director, quote, "My heart sank over this meeting because the possibility of bringing off something like this seemed to me at that time just to be as remote as anything could be. In practical terms, the Army was constitutionalist, and when you look here at the time frame in which the man was suddenly asking you to accomplish something, it seemed really almost inconceivable. What I came away from the meeting with was the distinct impression that we were being asked to do almost the impossible and trying to indicate this was going to be pretty tough." David Phillips, Chief Chile Task Force. "It is my feeling that the odds are unacceptable. It is something that is not going to work, and we are going to be burned if we get into it. What are the chances of pulling off a coup successfully or in any way stopping Allende from assuming the presidency? We never even got 2 chances out of 20. Phillips' testimony, page 16. "I assure you that those people that I was in touch with at the agency just about universally said, 'My God, why are we giving this assignment?'" Phillips' testimony, page 53. James Flannery, Deputy Chief, Western Hemisphere Division, quote, "There was just no question that we had to make this effort no matter what the odds were, and I think that most people felt that the odds were just pretty long." Flannery testimony, page 20. Further, CIA officials believed their judgment of the endeavor's difficulty was known to the White House. Helms commented on the September 15th meeting, "So realizing all of these things, I'm relatively certain that day that I pointed out this is going to be awfully tough." Helms' testimony, July 15, 75, page 16. Karamessinis recalled pointing out to the president that the Chilean military seemed to be disorganized and unwilling to do anything, and without their wanting to do something, there did not seem to be much hope. Karamessinis' testimony, page 10. 3. CIA's implementation of Track 2. A. Evolution of CIA strategy. The president's instruction to the CIA on September 15th to prevent Allende's assumption of power was given in the context of a broad U.S. government effort to achieve that end. The September 15th instruction to the CIA involved from the beginning the promotion of a military coup d'etat in Chile. Although there was talk of a coup in the Chilean military circles, there was little indication that it would actually take place without active U.S. encouragement and support. There was much talk among Chilean officers about the possibility of some kind of coup, but this was not the kind of talk that was being backed by, serious organizational planning. Karamessinis' testimony, August 6, 63, page 32. 1. The constitutional coup approach. Although efforts to achieve a political solution to the Allende victory continued simultaneously with Track 2, the agency premised its activities on the assumption that the political avenue was a dead end. On September 21st, CIA headquarters cabled its station in Santiago. Purpose of exercises to prevent Allende. Assumption of power. Paramilitary legerdemain has been discarded. Military solution is objective. The initial strategy attempted to enlist President Frey in promoting a coup to perpetuate his presidency for 6 more years. The agency decided to promise, quote, help in any election, which was an outgrowth of a successful military takeover. November 18, 1970, Helms' memo to Kissinger. Under this plan, Frey would invite the military to take over, dissolve the Congress, and proclaim a new election. A private U.S. citizen who had been a conduit for CIA's funds to Frey's 1964 campaign was sent to see him with this message on September 24th. Task Force log, September 23rd. Thomas Karamessinis, the deputy director of plans, testified, quote, so this was in sense not Track 2, but in sense another respect of a quiet and hopefully nonviolent military coup. This was abandoned when the military were reluctant to push Frey publicly, and number 2, Frey was reluctant to leave on his own in the absence of pressure from the military. There was left as the only chance of success a straight military coup. Karamessinis' testimony, August 6, 1975, page 6. At the same time, the station in Santiago reported, quote, strong reasons for thinking neither Frey nor Schneider will act. For that reason, any scenario in which either has to play an active role now appears utterly unrealistic. Overtures to lower echelon officers can of course be made. This involves promoting Army split. Station to headquarters, 424, September 23rd, 1970. To a military solution. President Frey's failure even to attempt to persuade his own party convention on October 3rd, 4th from reaching a compromise with Allende ended all hope of using him to prevent an Allende presidency. November 18th memo, Helms to Kissinger, page 16. Thus, by the beginning of October, it was clear that a vehicle for a military solution would have to be found in the second echelon of Chilean officers and that the top leadership of the armed services, particularly General Rene Schneider, constituted a stumbling block. The agency's task was to cause a coup in a highly uncompromised situation, and to overcome the formidable obstacles represented by phrase and action, Schneider's strong constitutionalism, and the absence of organization and enthusiasm among the officers who were interested in a coup. The threefold program was set into motion. A. Collect intelligence on coup-minded officers. B. Create a coup climate by propaganda, disinformation, and terrorist activities intended to provoke the left to give a pretext for a coup. C. Inform those coup-minded officers that the U.S. government would give them full support in a coup short of direct U.S. military intervention. B. The Chile Task Force. Because of the highly sensitive nature of the operation, a special task force was created in the CIA's Western Hemisphere Division to manage it. The task force was placed under the daily direction of the Deputy Director for Plans, Thomas Karamessinas, and a group of the agency's most experienced and skilled operators were detailed to the task force. All right, looks like we have an extensive asterisk here. Cable sent from CIA headquarters to Santiago on October 19th focused on creating an appropriate justification for a coup. The cable stated, 1. It still appears that Ref A coup has no pretext or justification that it can offer to make it acceptable in Chile or Latin America. It therefore would seem necessary to create one to bolster what will probably be their claim to a coup to save Chile from communism. You may wish include variety of themes in justification of coup to military for their use. These could include, but are not limited to, A. Firm intelligence that Cubans plan to reorganize all the intelligence services along with the Soviet-Cuban mold, thus creating structure for police state. B. Economic situation collapsing. C. By quick recognition of Cuba and communist countries, Allende assumed U.S. would cut off material assistance to armed forces, thus weakening them as constitutional barriers. Would then empty armories to communist people's militia with tasks to run campaign of terror based on alleged labor and economic sabotage. Use some quotes from Allende on this. 2. Station has written some excellent propaganda guidance using themes at hand and which best known to you. We are now asking you to prepare intel report based on some well-known facts and some fiction to justify coup, split opposition, and gain adherence for military group. With appropriate military contact can determine how to discover intel report which could even be planted during raids planned by the Carabineros. 3. We urge you to get this idea and some concrete suggestions to plotters as soon as you can. Coup should have a justification to prosper. That's a message from headquarters, 882, 19th of October, 1970. David Phillips, chief of station, Rio de Janeiro, was summoned back to Washington to head the operation, with the exception of the division chief, William Broe, B-R-O-E. His deputy, James Flannery, and the head of the Chile branch. No other officers in the division were aware of the task force's activities, not even those officers who normally had responsibility for Chile. The task force had a special communication channel to Santiago and Buenos Aires to compartment cable traffic about Track 2, November 18, 1970, Helms to Kissinger memo, page 3. Most of the significant operational decisions were made by Phillips, Broe, and Karamessinas, who met on a daily basis. It should be noted that all those involved with the task force described the pressure from the White House as intense. Indeed, Karamessinas has said that Kissinger, quote, left no doubt in my mind that he was under the heaviest of pressure to get this accomplished, and he in turn was placing us under the heaviest of pressure to get it accomplished. Karamessinas' testimony, August 6, 75, page 7. The deputy chief of the Western Hemisphere Division, James Flannery, testified that pressure was, quote, as tough as I ever saw it in my time there, extreme. Flannery testimony, July 15, 75, page 20. Broe testified that I have never gone through a period as we did on the Chilean thing. I mean, it was just constant, just continual pressure. It was coming from the White House. Broe testimony, August 4th, 75, page 55. C. The use of the Army attaché and interagency relations. The CIA station in Santiago had inadequate contacts within the Chilean military to carry out its task. However, the U.S. Army attaché in Santiago, Colonel Paul Weimert, knew the Chilean military very well due to his 5 years of service there and his broad personal contacts among the Chilean officers. Following a proposal by the chief of station, the CIA decided to enlist Colonel Weimert in collecting intelligence concerning the possibility of a coup, and to use him as a channel to let the interested Chilean military know of U.S. support for a coup. Karamessinas described this, procedure for the committee. Quote, we also need contact with a wider segment of the military, the senior military, which we had not maintained and did not have, but which we felt confident that our military representative in Chile had, and we got the approval of the DIA to enlist the cooperation of Colonel Weimert in our effort to procure intelligence. Karamessina's testimony again. To obtain Weimert's services, CIA officials prepared a suggested message for the director of DIA to send to the Army attaché in Santiago through CIA communications channels. Because the DIA director, General Donald V. Bennett, was in Europe on official business, the deputy director of Central Intelligence, General Cushman, invited DIA Deputy Director Lieutenant General Jamie M. Philpott to his office on September 28, 1970. During that meeting, General Cushman requested the assistance of the Army attaché, and General Philpott signed a letter which authorized transmission of a message directing the Army attaché to, quote, work closely with the CAS chief, or in his absence, his deputy, in contacting and advising the principal military figures who might play a decisive role in any move which might eventually deny the presidency to Allende. Do not advise the ambassador or the defense attaché of this message, or give them any indication of its portent. In the course of your routine activities, act in accordance with the ambassador's instructions. Simultaneously, I wish and now authorize you to act in a concerted fashion with the CAS chief. We have an asterisk here. General Bennett returned to the U.S. on the evening of October 10, 1970. General Philpott was acting director in Bennett's absence. This message is for your eyes only and should not be discussed with any persons other than those CAS officers who will be knowledgeable. CAS will identify them. Headquarters Memo 380 to Santiago. For this and all of the subsequent messages intended for Army attaché, the secret CIA communications channel was used. Both General Philpott and Thomas Karamessinas testified that initially the Army attaché would be used only to obtain or procure intelligence on Chilean military officers. Philpott, page 11, Karamessinas, page 6. The September 28, 1970 message to the Army attaché, however, did in fact trigger his deep involvement in the coup attempt. According to the attaché's testimony, he received day-to-day instructions from the chief of station, and on occasion the COS would show him messages ostensibly from Generals Burnett and or Philpott directing him to take certain actions. The COS also transmitted messages from the Army attaché to these generals. General Bennett testified that he never had knowledge of Track 2 and that he never received any communications relating thereto, nor did he ever authorize the transmission of any messages to the Army attaché. General Philpott also testified that he had no recollection of anything connected with Track 2 after his initial meeting with General Cushman on September 28th. U.S. Army Colonel Robert C. Roth, who in September and October 1970 was the Chief of Human Resources Division, Director of Collection, DIA, testified that he recalled working for Generals Bennett and Philpott on, quote, a priority requirement to identify Chilean personalities who might be helpful in preventing the election of an Allende president in Chile. Though Roth recalls no mention of Track 2 as such, the goal of this mission is identical to that described in the message of September 28th bearing Philpott's signature. Beginning on October 15th, Roth kept a chronology of his activities connected with Chile. This chronology reflects that there was a meeting on October 21st regarding the preparation of biographic material on Chilean generals, which focused on their willingness to participate in a military coup. Generals Bennett, Philpott, and a CIA representative attended. The chronology also shows that on October 21st, Roth delivered a message to Mr. Bro to be sent by CIA channels. A message was sent to Colonel Weimert that same day, ostensibly from General Bennett, which authorized, quote, FYI, suspension temporarily imposed on MAP and FMS has been rescinded. This action does not imply change in our estimate of situation. On the contrary, it is intended to place us in a posture in which we can formally cut off assistance if Allende elected and situation develops as we anticipate. Request update on situation, Santiago 446, reference headquarters 762, October 21st, 1970. Roth testified that this DIA project ended on October 23rd when he followed Philpott's instructions to deliver biographic information on Chilean figures and to Mr. Bro at CIA. Philpott also instructed him that any further action on the subject would henceforth be the responsibility of the CIA and that DIA would perform normal support functions. Both Bennett and Philpott testified that the activities described by Roth were routine DIA activities. However, Colonel Roth testified, quote, "I believe my impression at that time, or my recollection, is that I was informed that there was concern at the highest U.S. governmental level over the possible election of Allende, that DIA had then a priority responsibility of coming up with the identities of key Chilean personalities that would be helpful and so forth. I have nothing specific as to the nature of the instructions or the channels through which they came." And then a question, it was your sense at the time that you were working on a project that, if you had not been initiated by, at least had the attention or concern of the highest level. Colonel Roth, that was my impression at the time. Do you understand from your work in the Defense Department at that highest level of government usually indicated the President of the United States? Colonel Roth says, I would assume that. The CIA produced copies of several messages which identified Generals Bennett and Philpott as either the sender or recipient. Among these documents is a message relating to Track 2, which bears Philpott's purported signature, undated message, 14th October 1970. General Philpott admitted that the signature appears to be his, but he doubted that it was, and he could not recall signing it or having seen it. CIA also produced messages of October 14th and October 21, conveying instructions from General Bennett to the Army attaché. General Bennett testified he did not authorize these messages. Quote, "It is beyond the responsibilities which I had in the military assistance area. It goes beyond the responsibility which I had in terms that I would have to get the authority or the approval of the Secretary through the Chairman for covert action of this magnitude. This message would not have been signed by me." According to Karen Macinas, only the White House had the authority to issue the directives contained in those messages. Karen Macinas' testimony, page 84. The Department of Defense was unable to provide any documents bearing on the issue of Weimert's Track 2 instructions or responses. A DoD file search under the direction of General Daniel O. Graham, the present director of DIA, produced no copies of communication documents from September 10th to October 1970 period. However, Roth testified that detailed memoranda for the record which he prepared on his activities are missing from the files. CIA officials maintain that they acted faithfully in transmitting messages to Generals Burnett and or Philpott and in never sending a message without proper authorization. Mr. Karamacinas was particularly forceful in this regard. Quote, "I can recall no instance in my experience at the Central Intelligence Agency in which a message was received for an individual, an officer of the government anywhere in whatever department, which was not faithfully, directly, promptly, and fully and accurately delivered to that officer or to his duly authorized representatives." Also, quote, "We may have played tricks overseas, but it stopped at the water's edge, and we didn't play tricks among ourselves or among our colleagues within the agency or in other agencies." Quote, "We could not remain in business for a day if this had been the practice of the agency. It would have been no time at all before we would have been found out. A single instance of the kind of thing you're suggesting might have taken place would have put us out of business." Dr. Kissinger denied that he was ever informed of the Army's attaché's role or that he authorized any messages to be sent to the Army attaché. Kissinger testimony, page 22. The investigation to date has not resolved the conflict between the statements of the senior CIA, DIA, and White House officials. There are 4 possibilities that could explain the conflict. First, Generals Bennett and Philpott were cognizant of Track 2 and communicated their general instructions to the Army attaché. This possibility would be contrary to their sworn testimony. Second, General Bennett was not aware of Track 2, but General Philpott was, and communicated general instructions to the Army attaché. This possibility is supported by Roth's testimony, but would be contrary to Philpott's sworn testimony and his duty to keep General Bennett informed. Third, the CIA acted on its own and, after receiving initial authority from General Philpott, co-opted and ordered the Army attaché without further informing any member of the Department of Defense or the White House. This possibility would be contrary to the sworn testimonies of David Phillips, William Breaux, Thomas Karamacinas, and William Colby. Fourth, members of the White House staff authorized the CIA to convey orders to the Army attaché on the basis of high or highest government authority. Further, that White House staff directed that the Army attaché superiors in the Pentagon not be informed. This possibility would contradict the sworn testimony of Dr. Kissinger and General Alexander Haig. I wonder which one I believe here. D, the false flag base. In order to minimize the risks of making contact with the dissident Chilean officers, the task force decided in late September to set up a false flag base i.e. to send 4 staff officers to Chile posing as nationals of other countries to supplement Colonel Weimart's contacts with Chilean military officers. Given the limitations of the station's resources and Colonel Weimart's visibility, headquarters felt the use of false flag officers was necessary because we don't want to miss a chance. Headquarters Memo 363, September 27th, 1970. We have an asterisk. The use of false flag officers is not, according to David Phillips, an unusual practice either by the CIA or Foreign Intelligence Service. The false flaggers were compartmented from each other and reported separately on their contacts to a deep cover CIA officer in Santiago, who in turn reported to the station. According to the testimony of the chief of station, they received their instructions from Washington and not from him. Chief of Station testimony, Felix, August 1st, 1975. Chief of Station, although most of the station officers in Santiago did not know of Track 2. The Chief and Deputy Chief of Station were knowledgeable, and the Chief of Station initiated contacts on his own with Chilean officers. The COS had testified that he regarded Track 2 as unrealistic. I had left no doubt in the minds of my colleagues and superiors that I did not consider any kind of intervention in those constitutional processes desirable, and one of the reasons, certainly for my last recall to Washington, was to be read the Riot Act, which was done in a very pleasant manner, but very intelligible manner. Specifically, I was told at that time that the agency was not too interested in continuously being told by me that certain proposals which have been made could not be executed or would be counterproductive. Chief of Station Felix, testimony August 1st, 1975. The Chief of Station's objective in Track 2 did not go unnoticed. The following instructions to the COS was sent on October 7th. Quote, report should not contain analysis and augmentation, but simply report on actions taken. Headquarters, 612, October 7th. Very simply, headquarters wanted the station to take orders quietly, as was the agency itself. 3 examples of the Chief of Station's reporting bear out his claim to have dissented. Bear in mind that parameter of action is exceedingly narrow and available options are quite limited and relatively simple. Feel necessary to caution against any false optimism. It is essential that we not become victims of our own propaganda. Urge you to not convey impressions that station has surefire method of halting, let alone triggering coup attempts. Four, CIA efforts to promote a coup. It's the Chilean conspirators. Anti-Allende coup plotting in Chile centered around several key individuals. One of these was retired General Roberto Viaux, Viaux, the general who had led the Tacnazo insurrection the year before. Following the Tacnazo revolution and his dismissal from the army, Viaux retained the support of many non-commissioned and junior officers, as well as being the recognized leader of several right-wing civilian groups. CIA briefing paper, Special Mandate from the President on Chile, July 15, 1975. Another individual around which plotting centered was General Camilo Valenzuela, commander of the Santiago garrison. General Valenzuela was in league with several other active duty officers, including, and then as a redacted paragraph. All right, we have an asterisk. This revolt was engineered by Viaux, ostensibly for the purpose of dramatizing the military's demand for higher pay, but was widely interpreted as an abortive coup. All right, double asterisk. The record of meetings between Viaux and the active duty military officers is incomplete. The record does show, however, that Viaux met with redacted around October 7th. Chile Task Force Log, October 7th. On October 12th, Viaux met with General Valenzuela. Chile Task Force Log, 14th of October. One cable from Santiago indicates that redacted may have been a member of Viaux's inner circle of conspirators. Although a distinction can be made between the Viaux and Valenzuela groups, as CIA witnesses did throughout their testimony before the committee, the principal distinction between the two was that the latter was led by active-duty military officers. The two groups were in contact with each other. The record also indicates that they worked together in at least 2 of the 3 Schneider kidnap attempts. There was considerable communication among the various plotting elements, as Thomas Karamazidis Messinas testified, quote, "I might add here that it seemed that a good dozen or more, maybe 20 Chilean senior officers were privy to what was going on in addition to President Frey, and they were all talking to one another, exchanging views and trying to see how to best mount the kind of coup that they wanted to see take place." Karen Messina's testimony, page 10. B. Contacts prior to October 15th. The CIA's initial task in Chile was to assess the potential within the Chilean military to stage a coup. It recognized quickly that anti-Allende currents did exist in the military and the Carabineros police, but were immobilized by the tradition of military respect for the Constitution and the, quote, public and private stance of General Schneider, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, who advocated strict adherence to the Constitution. CIA report on Chilean task force activities, 18th of November 1970, page 17. The agency's task then was to overcome the apolitical constitutional-oriented inertia of the Chilean military. Since the very top of the Chilean military, embodied by General Schneider and his second-in-command, General Pratt, were hostile to the idea of a coup against Allende, discreet approaches were made to the second level of general officers. They were to be informed that the U.S. government would support a coup both before and after it took place. This effort began in earnest on October 5th when Colonel Weimart informed both an Army general, station priority contact, as an Air Force general of the pro-coup U.S. policy. 3 days later, the chief of station told Redacted that, quote, "the U.S. government favors a military solution and is willing to support it in any manner short of outright military intervention." Redacted informed the COS that there was no chance of a coup by the Chilean Army High Command. On October 7th, Colonel Weimart approached members of the War Academy in Santiago, who in turn asked to provide light weapons. This was Colonel Weimart's first contact with the Army Lieutenant Colonel, to whom he would ultimately pass 3 submachine guns on October 22nd. At this meeting, the Lieutenant Colonel told Colonel Weimart that he and his colleagues were, quote, "trying to exert force on Frey to eliminate General Schneider, to either replace him, send him out of the country. They had even studied plans to kidnap him. Schneider is the main barrier to all plans for the military to take over the government to prevent an Allende presidency." We have an asterisk. According to the CIA's wrap-up report on Track 2, between October 5th and October 20th, the CIA station and the Army attaché, for the most part the latter, made 21 contacts with key military and Carabinero officials. CIA report on Chilean task force activities, 8th of November 1970. Double asterisk. In his testimony, Colonel Weimart indicated that the lieutenant colonel was affiliated with Redacted. In a cable sent to headquarters on October 18th, in which the lieutenant colonel's request for 3 submachine guns was made, the station indicated that Weimart believed the Army officer and his companion, a Navy captain, were in league with Redacted. At another point in his testimony, Weimart stated there was Valenzuela here and the Navy captain and the Army lieutenant colonel and the Air Force general over there. Weimart testimony, page 107. The committee has been unable to determine the exact affiliation of the Army Lieutenant Colonel. However, as previously stated, both Redacted and Redacted were affiliated with General Valenzuela, and Redacted was in contact with General Vio. The next day, October 8th, headquarters cabled the station in response to the Weimart Lieutenant Colonel meetings. Headquarters took note of Schneider's resistance to coup plans and stated, quote, "This would make it more important than ever to remove him and to bring this new state of events. Anything we or station can do to affect the removal of Schneider? We know this rhetorical question, but we wish inspire thought on both ends on this matter. During the first week of intensive efforts, chances of success looked unusually bleak." The Chile Task Force log commented. President Frey and the highest levels of the armed forces unable to pull themselves together to block Allende, the Chilean military's tradition of non-intervention, Frey's reluctance to tarnish his historical image, General Schneider's firm constitutional stand, and most importantly, the lack of leadership within the government and military are working against a military takeover. Task Force log, 8th of October. The following day, the station made reference to the rapidly waning chances for success. This pessimism was not dispelled by their simultaneous judgment. Quote, "Station has arrived at Vio solution by process of elimination." End quote. 3 days later, the task force agreed, quote, "We continue to focus our attention on General Vio, who now appears to be the only military leader willing to block Allende." If Vio was the CIA's only hope of staging a coup, things were bleak indeed. His own colleagues, Generals Redacted and Valenzuela, described him as a general without an army. Yet in the first 2 weeks of October, he came to be regarded as the best hope for carrying out the CIA's Track 2 mandate. Although Colonel Weimart was instructed not to involve himself with Vio because of his high risk involved, He served initially as a contact to Vio through a redacted military attaché. The redacted report on October 5th that Vio wanted several hundred paralyzing gas grenades to launch a coup on October 9th. Santiago 476, October 6th. Headquarters turned down the request, concluding that a mini coup at this juncture would be counterproductive, and Vio should postpone his plans, quote, while encouraging him in a suitable manner to maintain his posture so that he may join larger movement if it later materializes. The primary purpose of the false flag base was to contact Vio, and it very rapidly relieved Weimart and the redacted attaché of the task. Vio reiterated his demand for an airdrop of weapons to the false flagger, and then again response was the same. Reject the demand for arms, but encourage him to keep planning. In essence, the agency was buying time with Vio. Quote, we wish to encourage Vio to expand and refine his coup planning, gain some influence over his actions. To achieve this latter purpose, headquarters authorized passing $20,000 in cash and a promise of $250,000 in life insurance to Vio and his associates as a demonstration of U.S. support. On October 13th, headquarters again indicated its concern over Schneider by asking what is to keep Schneider from making statement in early hours, which will freeze those military leaders who might otherwise join Vio. The station's response later that same day was Vio intends to kidnap Generals Schneider and Prats within the next 48 hours in order to precipitate a coup. This Vio kidnapping of Schneider was reported by the station as part of a coup that included Valenzuela. At about this time, the station began to receive encouragement from its other contacts. On October 14th, 10 days before the Chilean Congress was to vote, the task force log concluded, quote, now we are beginning to see signs of increasing coup activity from other military quarters, specifically an Army General, name deleted, Admiral Redacted, the forces in Concepcion and Valladolid, and perhaps even Frey and Osa. Task Force Log, October 14th. See October 15th decision. To summarize, by October 15th, General Vio had advertised to his contact a desire to proceed with a coup, had indicated he would deal with the Schneider obstacle by kidnapping him, had met at least once with Generals Redacted and Valenzuela, and had once postponed his coup plans. On October 15th, Thomas Karamessinas met Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig at the White House to discuss the situation in Chile. According to agency's record of this meeting, Karamessinas provided a rundown on Vio, the redacted meeting with Redacted, and in some detail, the general situation in Chile from the coup possibility viewpoint. A decision was made at the meeting to defuse the Vio coup plot, at least temporarily. We have a asterisk here. The reason for Vio postponing his coup plans was the subject of a cable from Santiago to headquarters. Quote, we discount Vio's statement that he had called off his coup attempt because of a false flag officer's impending visit. Other reporting indicated Vio probably was not able or intending to move this weekend. There's also reason to believe that General Valenzuela was instrumental in persuading Vio to postpone, according to the Chile Task Force log. Quote, station reported that on October 12th, General Valenzuela met with General Vio and attempted to persuade him not to attempt a coup. It was decided by those present at the agency must get a message to Vio warning him against any precipitate action. In essence, the message should state, quote, we have reviewed your plans, and based on your information and ours, we come to the conclusion that your plans for a coup at this time cannot succeed. Failing, they may reduce your capabilities in the future. Preserve your assets. We will stay in touch. The time will come when you, with all your other friends, can do something. You'll continue to have our support. This meeting concluded, according to the agency's records, quote, on Dr. Kissinger's note that the agency should continue keeping the pressure on every Allende weak spot in sight now, after the 24th of October, after 5th of November, and into the future until such time as new marching orders are given. Mr. Karamessinas stated that the agency would comply. The following day, CIA headquarters cabled the results of the White House meeting to the station in Santiago. 2. It is firm and continuing policy that Allende be overthrown by a coup. We are to continue to generate maximum pressure toward this end, utilizing every appropriate resource. 3. After the most careful consideration, it was determined that a View coup carried out by him alone with the forces now at his disposal would fail. Thus, it would be counterproductive to our Track 2 objectives. It was decided that CIA get a message to View warning him against precipitate action. Headquarters Memo 802, 16th of October. The message was supplemented by orders to, quote, continue to encourage him, Vio, to amplify his planning, encourage him to join forces with other coup planners. The message concluded, quote, "There is great and continuing interest in the activities of redacted Venezuela and et al. We wish them optimum good fortune." We have an asterisk here. Secretary Kissinger's recollection of the October 15th meeting is not in accord with that of Mr. Karamessinas or the cable, headquarters 802, that was sent the day following to the station in Santiago. The matter will be discussed in Part 5 of this report. D. Coup planning and attempts after October 15th. The decision to defuse General Vio was passed to Vio's redacted on October 17th. The redacted responded that it did not, looks like it's probably going to be cut out. The cutout responded that it did not matter because they had decided to proceed with the coup in any case. At the final meeting of the CIA false flagger and Vio's redacted on October 18th, the agency was informed that the coup would proceed on October 22nd and that the abduction of General Schneider is first link in chain of events to come. And quote, emergency channel of a communication with Vio was maintained. Report on CIA Chilean Task Force activities, 18th November 1970. As previously stated, by mid-October, things suddenly looked brighter for a coup being mounted at the high level. Chilean military contacts, as a CIA overview statement in Track 2 stated, quote, coup possibilities afforded by the active duty military group led by General Valenzuela and Admiral Redacted had always seemed more promising than the capabilities of the Vio group. These military officers had the ability and resources to act, providing they decided to move and organize themselves accordingly. CIA briefing paper, quote, special mandate from the president on Chile, July 15, 1975. By mid-October, those military officers appeared to be moving in this direction. On the evening of October 17th, Colonel Weimert met with the Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Navy Captain. They requested 8 or 10 tear gas grenades, 3 .45 caliber machine guns, and 500 rounds of ammunition. The Navy Captain said he had 3 machine guns himself, quote, but can be identified by serial numbers as having been issued to him, therefore unable to use them. Colonel Weimert said, and the chief of station have testified that the officers wanted the machine guns for self-protection. The question, of course, is whether the arms were intended for use or were used in the kidnapping of General Schneider. The fact that the weapons were provided to the lieutenant colonel and the Navy captain and that Vio associates were convicted of the Schneider killing suggests that the guns were not involved. God, is that some fucking mental gymnastics? The machine guns and ammunition were sent from Washington by diplomatic pouch on the morning of October 19th, although headquarters was puzzled about their purpose. We'll continue to make effort provided them, but find our credulity stretched by Navy captain leading his troops with sterile guns. What is special purpose for these guns? We will try to send them whether you can provide explanation or not. Headquarters Memo 854, October 18th. The first installment was delivered to the Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Navy Captain late in the evening, October 18th, and consisted of the 6 tear gas grenades intended originally for Vio. We have a couple asterisks here, one from the previous page. 2 coup plotters, Generals Redacted, I'm assuming, and Redacted, made one last attempt to persuade General Schneider to change his anti-coup position on October 15th. The station reported that the meeting turned out to be a complete fiasco. Schneider refused to listen to General Redacted's eloquent presentation of communist action in Chile and adamant in maintaining his non-involvement stance. Here's another one. As previously stated, after October 15th, CIA efforts to promote a coup in Chile focused on the activity duty military officers Valenzuela et al. Rather than Vio. An example of this shift in focus was the decision to provide the Army Lieutenant Colonel and Army Captain the tear gas grenades originally intended for Vio. A cable from Santiago explained the purpose of this action. Quote, station plans were give 6 tear gas grenades to Colonel Weimert for delivery to armed forces officers, deletion, instead of having false flag officer deliver them to Vio group. Our reasoning is that Weimert dealing with active duty officers. Also false flagger leaving evening October 18th and will not be replaced, but Weimert will stay here. Hence important that Weimert credibility with armed forces officers be strengthened. That same day, General Valenzuela informed Colonel Weimert that he, Redacted, and I'm assuming multiple people here, and an Air Force general were prepared to sponsor a coup. CIA report on Chilean task force activities, 18th of November. Their plan was to begin with the kidnapping of General Schneider on the following evening, October 19th, at a military dinner being given for Schneider, after which Schneider would be flown to Argentina. Frey would resign and leave Chile. Redacted would head the military junta and dissolve Congress. With respect to the kidnapping of Schneider, the cable reports, quote, General Vio, knowledgeable of above operation but not directly involved. He has been sent to Vienna to stay with prominent physician, will be seen in public places during 19th and 20th October to demonstrate fact that above operation not his doing, will be allowed to return to Santiago at end of week. Military will not admit involvement in Schneider's abduction, which is to be blamed on leftists. The kidnapping of the evening of October 19th failed because General Schneider left in a private vehicle rather than his official car, and his police guard failed to be withdrawn, but the Army Lieutenant Colonel assured Colonel Weimert that another attempt would be made on October 20th. Colonel Weimert was authorized to pay Valenzuela $50,000, quote, which was the price agreed upon between the plotters and the unidentified team of abductors. We have an asterisk here. The, quote, false flag officer, who was in contact with Vio at the time the Valenzuela plan was given to Colonel Weimert, apparently understood that Vio was involved in the October 19th attempt. He stated that, quote, were you told any of the details of how the Vio kidnapping would be carried out? And then Mr. Sarno says they indicated it was going to be at some sort of banquet which the General Schneider would be attending. That's from the Sarno testimony, page 37. But Weimert insisted that the kidnapping be completed before he paid the money. At the same time, General Valenzuela assured Colonel Weimert that the military was now prepared to move. The second abduction attempt on the 20th also failed, and the task force concluded, quote, since the Valenzuela group is apparently having considerable difficulty in executing even the first step of its coup plan, the prospects for a coup succeeding or even occurring before the 24th of October now appears remote. The killing of General Schneider. In the early morning hours of October 22nd at 2 a.m., Colonel Weimert delivered the 3 submachine guns with ammunition to Army Lieutenant Colonel in an isolated section of Santiago. We have a lengthy asterisk here. Although Colonel Weimert's testimony and the cable traffic do not clearly establish the identity of the group to which the Lieutenant Colonel was affiliated, 2 CIA statements on Track 2 tie the weapons and therefore the Lieutenant Colonel to the Valenzuela group. Quote, the only assistance requested by Valenzuela to set the plan of October 19th into motion through Schneider's abduction was several submachine guns, ammunition, a few tear gas grenades, and gas masks, all of which were provided, plus $50,000 for expenses, which was to be passed on demand. CIA report on Chilean task force activities, 18th of November, 1970. Continuing, quote, 3 submachine guns together with 6 gas canisters and masks were passed to the Valenzuela group at 2 a.m. on October 22nd. The reason why they still wanted the weapons was because there were 2 days remaining before the Congress decided the presidential election, and the Valenzuela group maintained some hope they could still carry out their plans. CIA briefing paper, quote, special mandate from the president on Chile, July 15th, 1975. At about 7 a.m. that day, the group that intended to kidnap General Schneider met to discuss last-minute instructions. According to the findings of the Chilean military court which investigated the Schneider killing, neither the Army Lieutenant Colonel nor the Navy captain were there. Shortly after 8 a.m., General Schneider's car was intercepted on his way to work by the abductors, and he was mortally wounded when he drew his handgun in self-defense. The military court determined that handguns had been used to kill General Schneider, although it is also found that one unloaded machine gun was at the scene of the killing. The first station reports following the Schneider shooting said, quote, military mission sources claimed General Schneider machine-gunned on way to work, and, quote, assailants used grease guns. The submachine gun had previously been described as grease guns. Thus, the initial reaction of the station was that Schneider had been shot with the same kind of weapons delivered several hours earlier to the Army Lieutenant Colonel. Santiago then informed headquarters station has instructed Colonel Weimert to hand over $50,000 if General Valenzuela requests, thus indicating that the station thought the kidnapping had been accomplished by Valenzuela's paid abductors. Later that day, the station cabled headquarters, quote, station unaware if assassination was premeditated or whether it constituted bungled abduction attempt. In any case, it is important to bear in mind that move against Schneider was conceived by and executed at behest of senior armed forces officers. We know that General Valenzuela was involved. We also near certain that Admiral Redacted, Army Lieutenant Colonel, and Navy Captain Whitting and involved. We have reason for believing that General Vio and numerous associates fully clued in but cannot prove or disprove that execution or attempt against Schneider was entrusted to elements linked with Vio. Important factor to bear in mind is that armed forces and not retired officers or extreme rightists set Schneider up for execution or abduction. All we can say is that attempt against Schneider is affording armed forces one last opportunity to prevent Allende's election if they are willing to follow Valenzuela's scenario. We have an asterisk here. The military court determined that those who participated in the shooting of General Schneider on October 22nd were part of the Vio-led conspiracy. The court also found that this same group had participated in the October 19th and 20th kidnap attempts. In June 1972, General Vio was convicted for complicity in the plot culminating in the death of General Schneider. He received a 20-year prison sentence for being the author of the crime of kidnapping, which resulted in serious injury to the victim, and a 5-year exile for conspiring to cause a military coup. Also convicted on the latter charge were Generals Valenzuela and Tirado. They received sentences of 3 years in exile. F. Post-October 22nd events. The shooting of General Schneider resulted immediately in a declaration of martial law, the appointment of General Prats to succeed Schneider as commander-in-chief, and the appointment of General Valenzuela as chief of Santiago province. These measures and others taken caused the Chile task force to make the following initial judgment. With only 24 hours remaining before the congressional runoff, a cool climate exists in Chile. The attack on General Schneider has produced developments which closely follow Valenzuela's plan. Consequently, the plotters' positions have been enhanced. On October 23, Director Helms reviewed and discussed Track 2. It was agreed that a maximum effort has been achieved and that now only the Chileans themselves can manage a successful coup. The Chileans have been guided to a point where a military solution is at least open to them. Although it was not immediately clear to CIA observers the station's prediction of October 9th that the shooting of Schneider as a result of an abduction attempt would, quote, rally the army firmly behind the flag of constitutionalism was correct. On October 24th, Dr. Allende was confirmed by the Chilean Congress. General Schneider died the next day. The moral of the story is coups don't work. Ever. There's always a backlash. And that's going to wrap it up for today, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back tomorrow where we will continue. We probably got 2 more days of this before we move into some more of the ZR Rifle stuff. But hey guys, if you didn't know, I wrote a book. It's called A Warning from History. It's available on Amazon.com. You can get it there. I'm getting ready to start my second book. Jury's out on what it's going to be called. Realistically, I want to have it out by the end of the year, but that's not going to happen. It's probably going to be 12 months from now. I believe I'm going to begin pre-sales with a whole new set of notes, which will go on sale August the 1st. That is my current plan. So it has to be August 1st because I'm going on fish tour and I need as much money as possible so I don't have to eat fucking veggie burritos and grilled cheese every day for 3 weeks. So that's it, guys. I'll be back tomorrow. See you then.